Hello, and welcome to the State of 911 webinar series, hosted by the National 911 Program. My name is Sherry, and I will be the moderator for today's session. This webinar series is designed to provide useful information for the 911 stakeholder community about how nationwide 911 data and strategic plans can improve emergency communications at the state and local level. It includes real experiences from leaders utilizing these processes throughout the country. Today's session will feature presenters from the Texas Department of Public Safety and the Arizona Department of Administration. Mr. Todd Early, Deputy Assistant Director of the Public Safety Communications Service for the Texas Department of Public Safety. Mr. Early will share his experiences and lessons learned as the Texas single point of contact for FirstNet and one of the early builders. Barbara Yeager, E&P and State 911 Administrator of the Arizona Department of Administration, will discuss lessons learned during procurement of NG911. For more information on future National 911 Program webinars, or to access archived recordings or learn more about the National 911 Program, please visit 911.gov. Feedback or questions about the webinars can be sent to national911team@mcp911.com. If you are experiencing difficulty with the WebEx application, please call WebEx Technical Assistance at 1-866-229-3239 and select option 1. Please note that all participants' phone lines have been put in a listen-only mode, and this webinar is being recorded. To ask questions of our presenters, feel free to take one of two actions. Using WebEx's chat feature located on the right-hand side of your screen, enter your question at any time during the presentation and it will be entered into a queue. This feature is not visible while your screen is in the expanded page view. Or, to ask your question live, use the Raise Hand feature to request your phone line be unmuted, and you will be called upon to ask your question. With that, I'd like to introduce Ms. Lori Flaherty, Coordinator for the National 911 Program. Lori, please go ahead.
Thanks, Sherry. Before I introduce our first speaker today, I just want to take 1 minute to tell everyone about a new resource that we're about to release that addresses how important both FirstNet and NG911 are to building the emergency communications ecosystem of the future. As you may know, the National 911 Program has 3 responsibilities: to administer a grant program specifically for the benefit of 911 public safety answering points, to act as a convener for all 911 stakeholders, and to collect and create resources for the folks at the state and local level who actually operate our nation's 911 system. It's in that last regard that we have recently partnered with the National Association of State 911 Administrators, or NASNA, to create a resource that specifically provides clarity on the unique role that both NG911 and FirstNet play in emergency communication. It's a high-level overview that makes the case for how these two systems must work well together for the benefit of their citizens, and this 16-page magazine will help both public safety and 911 leaders ensure that the communities that they serve are aware of the important role that both FirstNet and NG911 have in serving their citizens' emergencies. This resource is going to be posted on 911.gov this week. We plan to email the publication link to all of today's participants so that you can get your hands on it as soon as possible. And with that, let me introduce our first speaker, Mr. Todd Early. As Sherry said, Todd is the Deputy Assistant Director of the Public Safety Communications Service for the Texas Department of Public Safety. Todd is also the Statewide Interoperability Coordinator, or the SWIC, and he's also the Texas Single Point of Contact for FirstNet, or the SPOC, a man of many hats. As the public safety broadband moves closer to becoming a reality, the FirstNet team really relies heavily on folks like Todd for their insight, their information, and the valuable information that was gained by the efforts of the 5 early builders of this system. They have a lot of lessons learned. They are able to share many of their use cases and the ideas that they collected during their experience. So, Todd, thank you so much for being with us today. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Lori, and I truly appreciate the invitation to get to speak today, and excited about this chance. So I'm going to cover today discussion on FirstNet and really get into the 5 early builders, as Lori said, and I'm going to center the majority of our conversation on the Texas early builder build-out and some of the lessons learned in that build-out. So I'd like to remind folks, if you can go to the next slide, please, that really where this came from, and after 9/11, it was all of our major national associations that really unified and came together to ask for this network to be built. So it's something that Congress gave us in 2012 and something that we all asked for, and it's an exciting time in public safety. Next slide is on March 30th of this year, Secretary Ross made the announcement and all the work that's been done by states and by FirstNet on the acquisition, the award to AT&T, being a 25-year contract. The total investment of that across the 25 years was $46.5 billion, so a massive amount of investment into this network. The next slide that you'll see is just a quick timeline on where things are at with the states. FirstNet and AT&T delivered the draft state plans to the states on June the 19th. They actually delivered them 2 or 3 months early. So states have been in the review process of those draft state plans. And the comments from the states on the draft state plans were due back to FirstNet on August the 4th. Just last week, so states have been extremely busy looking at those and providing feedback and comments back. States also have the ability to do what's called an early opt-in, so that's what you've seen from some of the states and territories. I believe as of yesterday there were 12 states or 11 states and 1 territory that had chose to early opt-in to the FirstNet network build-out. The timeline remains that after the August 4th date, the states have FirstNet has about 45 days and to make additions and updates to the state plan portals. The timeline shows that the final state plans should be delivered to the states probably around September, the mid part of September, and statutorily the governors of each state and territory have 90 days once those final plans are delivered to make a final decision. The next slide shows the 5 early builders. So after FirstNet was created, these 5 states and jurisdictions were allowed to build out projects ahead of the FirstNet rollout. And so there's been a lot of lessons learned coming from these 5 early builders. And I'll take a minute to go over this. The first one you see is LA Ricks. They currently have 76 sites on the air in Los Angeles, California. New Mexico has a 7-site system deployed along the southwest border of New Mexico. New Jersey has 35 sites deployed, and all of the New Jersey sites are actually deployable. So part of the lessons learned from New Jersey was deployable integration and how deployables will be utilized in this nationwide network. Adams County, Colorado has 15 sites deployed near Denver International Airport. And then Texas, specifically in Harris County, currently has 36 sites deployed and 4 other sites that are in greenfield build. So there's been a lot of lessons learned come out of these early builder projects. They've been able to really see what works, but also what doesn't work, and provide that feedback to the other early builders, but also back to FirstNet to really get the end user, the folks that are really on the ground utilizing these services in this network, the valuable input that they have, so that can be considered in the rollout of this network all across the nation. And I would say that feedback has really been invaluable from the first responder perspective of what's really needed across the nation. If you go to the next slide, I want to spend the next probably 15 minutes discussing the Texas early builder site, specifically in Harris County. The folks in Harris County really pioneered this. It wasn't the state of Texas that did it. It was the folks in Harris County back after the hurricanes of 2008, when they had to contraflow approximately 3 million people out because of an incoming hurricane. And really they realized right then that that not only do we need mission critical voice in public safety, that now really data is becoming mission critical. And they really started the discussions and build out of this. The state of Texas got involved in 2010 for approval of the spectrum, but it's really been the folks in Harris County who have really pioneered this and done a great job. Bruce High, the CIO, and his team have done a great job on that. The next slide shows the current build out of the 36 sites that I discussed, and that is mobile coverage for the build out there in Harris County, across Harris County. They also have one mobile site, and we DPS also have one mobile site as well. So they have deployed this this solution in several different large events. So the next slide shows the Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo, and they've deployed this solution the last 2 years at the Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo. And you look at that and you think, well, why rodeo? But when you look at the statistics of that event, each year it's over 2 million people, 20 days long, and over 1,000 public safety officials that work that. And so they really gained a lot of valuable input and feedback from the public safety first responders on the utilization of this technology and how it's integrated. When you really look at that event, it's bigger than the Super Bowl because the amount of visitors and the number of days that it's actually deployed. So I'm going to spend the majority of my time talking about the deployment during the Super Bowl this last February. If you could go to the next slide, please. Harris County, in coordination with the City of Houston, spent really about a year planning the deployment during the Super Bowl of the FirstNet type Band 14 technology. And in my opinion, they did a really great job of really gathering all of the requirements and sitting down with public safety to look at all of the requirements that they had and how they would develop a solution to meet what public safety needed. So if you go to the next slide, this really shows their planning process. But basically what they did was sit down with all of the different various groups, operational groups, and really have a discussion with them on what their operational requirements were. And then they developed a concept of operations, and then took many months during the football season to actually test some of the applications that they utilized to train folks so that when the day of the Super Bowl event started happening, folks were trained and knew how to operate the devices and had some standard operating procedures written around that. If you look at the next slide, it shows all the agencies that they actually supported. They deployed about 200 devices to public safety, and this shows a myriad of local, state, and federal organizations that they supported, really across all disciplines. And again, in my opinion, got a lot of great feedback, and I'll give you some statistics of some utilization here in just a few minutes. The next slide actually shows kind of their architecture of how they communicated during the Super Bowl, and you see here that you know, they have the various specialized operational groups that really were very large operational groups within themselves. And so some of the information distribution and the architecture, you see the small circles around those specialized groups. Through this technology, they were actually able to communicate within their specialized operational group. They were able to send information back and forth to the command post. And then one of the things that was really effective from the public safety standpoint and the feedback that they received from the first responders was the ability to send information out that hit all of the groups. And so you had the ability to really hit everybody that had the devices and were utilizing the devices during this operation. And several times that information paid off, and I'll talk about a couple of those use cases in the next few minutes. So some of the use cases that I wanted to discuss, if you go to the next slide, and there were many, I really had to pare it down because of the timing of this, you know, this presentation. But I put a couple in here. One of them that you see now is the undercover units were able to actually utilize the technology. You know, when you're an undercover unit and it's kind of hard to carry a big, you know, land mobile radio around with you if you're trying to be undercover. But the undercover fit team units were actually able to take the devices and take pictures of some of the criminal operations that were going on. And what you see here on the screen is one of those units were able to take a picture of someone who was selling merchandise and other things counterfeit. And what he was able to do is take that picture, and he actually, the guy was selling counterfeit Super Bowl T-shirts and other items, and he had a discussion with the guy and said, well, I don't have any money. I'm going to come back, and if you'll give me your phone number, I'll connect with you and hook up with you. And they were able to send that information over to the criminal investigation folks. But they were able to take pictures of that, and it looked just like a normal cell phone operation to where, they had no idea, and they were able to do that undercover. And so really when you look at some of the undercover operations, and you have a device that, folks, everybody has cell phones and other things in their hands, and distribute that information, even with a picture, really becomes effective. And they really did that quite a few times, whether it was counterfeit tickets, whether it was folks going on the roof to work on equipment. When you have snipers on top of the roofs for a national NSSE event, you definitely want to let them know when other folks are coming on the roof. So there was many different use cases that they were actually able to utilize that on. The next use case that I want to take just a minute to discuss, one of their patrol units ran a suspicious vehicle, and when he got the return back, it actually came back that the subject inside possibly had a felony warrant. But by the time he tried to make a traffic stop, the guy had already driven away, and he wasn't able to make a traffic stop. It actually came out that the subject fled from him, but he actually didn't. He just, by the time he got the information back, wasn't able to make that traffic stop. But what they were able to do, and they used several different applications in the Super Bowl, from situational awareness to the ability to send video across the network, manpower to know where the fire department was able to actually utilize that to do their PARS checks. And one of them that really rose to the top was a messaging application called Moxtra. And this messaging application, they were able to send information out, again, in their various groups or to all of the operational groups. So what you see here is a message coming out on the subject that he ran, giving a description of the subject, description of the vehicle, and information on that, and telling folks that, he came back with a felony warrant. So if you go to the next slide, one of the analysts was actually able to pull a picture of the subject, and that big red circle that you saw on the distribution architecture, they were able to send that picture out to everybody in the group. And what you're able to see, and what they were able to do, is they were actually able to identify that the subject had made it inside the NFL experience, and they actually caught him in an autograph line and were able to take him down in a matter of less than an hour. So the felon had actually made it inside, and they were able to take him down. They had many examples of this type of use cases. Some of the other use cases that I thought were pretty neat as well. Missing children always rises to the top. And when you're in an operation like that, or you're in an operation like a huge football game, you get a description of a lost child being an 8-year-old wearing a maroon shirt, or if you're in Austin, Texas, a burnt orange shirt. With this type of technology, you're able to distribute pictures, and they had these devices at the entry gate. So when they had lost children, not only were they able to distribute a picture of the lost child, the folks at the entry gates were actually, and exit gates, were actually able to look at that and able to look at all the children exiting, those venues, and see if it was one of the lost children. So another use application of this thing was lost children, and that really kind of rose to the top. If you go to the next slide, just to show you the impact, and I said at the beginning of this, they really did a good job, in my opinion, of integrating data and usage into this operation. You think a lot of times that our folks are, they were so used to using land mobile radio that data integration is sometimes hard, and to get adoption is sometimes not easy. Just the one application that I talked about with Moxtra, it was utilized and viewed over 58,000 times, and they actually created almost 7,000 messages during the 9-day event and distributed those messages across, across this network. So it was really impactful. They did a 2-day after action report and really got a lot of great feedback from the end users of the things that worked, the things that didn't work, and really, what advancement did it bring them? How did it allow them to do their job safer, smarter, faster? And so if you go to the next slide, it really shows some of the value of the mobile applications utilized during the Super Bowl. obviously reduce radio traffic and reduce dispatch time. They were able to keep the sensitive information off the radio. Improvement in interoperability and sharing of information. When you have that many disciplines, and they literally had public safety from all over the nation come in there, whether it was bomb dogs and other public safety folks working the event, the ability to distribute that information to folks was really, really helpful. And then also, really reduce the amount of misinformation. When information goes through, 4 or 5 different folks, if you've got the ability to distribute that to everybody all at one time was really helpful. The next slide that you see, Brazos County Sheriff's Office also has one site there at Kyle Field, and they've been utilizing this for quite some time. They have all of their patrol units, which is over 60 units deployed with this equipment, and they'll quickly tell you that they've gone from being a test, organization to being operationally dependent upon this network. The next slide that you see just shows they have their CAD data integrated and traversing this network. They're able to get, the information with this dedicated network a lot faster and have a, dedicated network. Next slide that you see is just integration of their mapping and their GIS. They're able to create hot zones. And obviously this is a CAD application, but they're able to utilize this network to traverse that. The next couple of slides that I'm going to show you are really driven off of some of the use cases, the early use cases that they have. What you see on the screen here now is they had an armed standoff come in as a domestic disturbance, turn into a 6-hour armed standoff. The guy was wanted, but they were able to position their patrol units around the residence, and now they had a 360-degree view of the residence, and they were able to send that information across this network and put that to the sheriff's office. The next slide that you see, they were actually doing a news article, and they had 3 tornadoes that touched down in and around that area. And what you're able to see is they had 6 units out there that they were actually able to see real-time view of the damage and devastation, the high water crossings, and everything that they had there. If you go to the next slide, as we do this outreach and the discussions in Texas, one of the things that we kind of give them is really kind of the continuum of what many of you do, and kind of the continuum of 911 and next generation 911, that being that, the call comes from the citizen, it's taken through a PSAP, a call taker and a dispatcher, and it goes to the first responder, many times by voice or sometimes to a mobile data computer terminal. So as we discuss this critical network, one of the things and questions that we get a lot is about, how is next generation 911 going to integrate with this network? So if you advance through the lower piece of this slide, the critical work that many of you are doing with next generation 911 and really, developing the dedicated advanced 911 systems from really the citizen to the 911 center to the communication center. The discussion that we've had is FirstNet will be really the dedicated responder to responder or responder to communication center, so that as the critical work that many of you do in advancing and developing these next generation 911 systems and these ESI nets, once that technology is in place, the ability to get that information from the citizen all the way to the responder, if that's the decision that's made by the organization and entity, is really where, in my opinion, these two come together and actually integrate. And so there's been a lot of work that many of you have done that has to be, discussed and integrated in that. We actually, Kelly Merriweather, the executive director of CSEC in Texas, and some of her team and I went to Dallas and had a discussion with AT&T because we wanted to make sure, as what was discussed as far as, information and integration, that we had some clear understanding of. And so we were able to really have a good dialogue and discussion about next generation 911. And a couple of things were really driven out of that. There's obviously FirstNet has a subject matter expert that they're utilizing to discuss and look at the integration of this. But we wanted to make sure that all of the standards-based work that was being done across the nation, that they knew and understood and made sure that that was being discussed when they start talking about the integration of this network. And that also we wanted to make sure that, you would be able to integrate the various ESI nets that were being done across the nation. And so I would, say that there's still discussion that has to happen. There's still integration that has to happen. But we were pleased at the discussion that we had and the meeting that we had, and obviously Kelly and her team went with us, and we appreciated that meeting and the discussion. So I think there's more discussion that has to happen on that piece of it, but obviously some great discussion. If you go real quick to the next slide, I'm going to advance through the next couple of slides pretty quick. This is our website. We have an e-learning portal down in the bottom left-hand side where it says take an online course. This was our way to get education out to folks, not just first responders and public safety, but anybody that wanted to take that. You see that down in the bottom left-hand side. Folks that went to that got 2 CE credit hours if they required CE credit hours. The next slide, one of the things that we talked about was really the innovation of this network. And this is an e-learning portal, and that portal really walks everybody through the entire program of where did this come from, what does it bring public safety disciplines. And we've made sure throughout this entire planning process that we are, integrated with the 911 folks across the state. Kelly and her team and my team have been very tightly integrated to make sure that we don't miss anything when it comes to the development of this network, the development of the next generation 911 network, all of the regional ESI nets that are going on across the state to make sure that, we know and understand what's going on. If you go to the next slide, one of the things we talk about with this is the innovation of this, and that being this refers to a bridge collapse. When you look at all public safety first incidents and disasters, one of the things that always comes to the top is communications. And so if you go to the next slide, one of the things that we talk about is the innovation of this network, being able to really have situational awareness of an incident. And this is a hypothetical application, but I think this is where some of this is going. When you have an incident like the Bastrop wildfires in the state of Texas that burned 1,700 homes, or the West Fertilizer plant explosion where we lost many, many first responders in that, you have folks coming from all over the state to help with that. But having the ability through an application to have visibility and awareness is extremely important. If you go ahead and click again, having the ability to know where staging areas are at, know where fire and EMS units are established, know who they are, where they're from, on down to the medical map, knowing where your hospitals, burn centers, trauma units are at, on down to evacuation status to know where your sheltering is at, where your evacuations, mandatory and voluntary, are happening, on down to all the ICS forms that the incident commander is utilizing, and then last but not least, the communications plan, so that now, when folks are going to an incident, having the ability to get all of this information out across this network to those first responders before they ever get there is just some of how I see this network as being really beneficial to public safety. And so that wraps up my presentation. I appreciate the chance to get to be here today to discuss. And again, the other four early builders are doing a great amount of work as well, and really giving that information back to FirstNet and helping us really kind of drive this from the first responder perspective of lessons learned. So Sherry, I'll turn it back over to you all and try to answer any questions if there's time to answer any questions.
Okay, great. Thank you, Todd. So as Todd just mentioned, we'll now start the QA portion of our session. And as a reminder, if you'd like to ask a question, you can either use the WebEx chat feature located on the right-hand side of your screen, or you can press the raise hand button so that we can unmute your phone.
Thank you very much, Sherry. We do have a couple questions that came in. The first question, is the Texas website still available for people to learn about NG911?
Yes, ma'am. The Texas website on FirstNet and the e-learning portal and the information that's in there is absolutely available to anybody that would like to utilize it.
Thank you. Our next question is a two-part question. Did the app require a fee per user? And the next part of that question, will this app be used for future large events?
So that's a great question, and the first piece of that I'm not able to answer. The folks in Harris County and the city of Houston actually were the folks that worked with industry on the various applications that were utilized. So I don't know as far as fees and licensing what they did on that piece of it. The second question, I absolutely see this type of application, not just this specific one, but the various type of applications that were utilized in that event, being utilized, in large events really from here on out. I personally think, we're only seeing the beginning of innovation with this network, and there's many things that we have thought of, but I think there's many things that industry and entrepreneurs and others out there in the application world are going to come up with that are really going to benefit the safety of our first responders and the safety of citizens that are out there. So I really do see this type of applications being utilized in the future.
Thank you, Todd. Can you tell us how many questions Texas had for FirstNet on its draft state plan, and whether you all might opt in as early as other states have?
I appreciate the question. I'm not able to discuss the feedback that we gave, other than we reviewed it with a review team and in coordination with the Office of the Governor, and have provided feedback on that. And as of today, no decision has been made.
Okay. Next question: what kind of devices were used at the Super Bowl event?
So that's a great question. They used 2 or 3 different type of devices. First of all, some of these applications can ride on just iPhones and smartphones, Samsung type devices. And I think as you look at the FirstNet and AT&T offering that they've offered, and the ability to utilize the existing network that's out there, and not just the 20 megahertz of spectrum that Congress gave public safety, that's really a game changer, because folks will be able to utilize existing devices and have priority and preemption on the network for their first responders. And so we saw some of that at the Super Bowl, of utilizing just their normal iPhones across the commercial cellular network there. But they also utilized on the Band 14 network, they utilized some Motorola Lex devices and also some Sonom devices as well.
Okay. Thank you again, Mr. Early, for joining us and for providing us information. Lori, I'm going to ask you to please go ahead and introduce our second speaker.
Thanks, Sherry. Our second speaker is Barb Yeager, and Ms. Barbara Yeager has been the State 911 Administrator for the Arizona Department of Administration for some time, and she will discuss the challenges of procuring NG911 in a budget-constrained world. There are an awful lot of lessons to be learned, particularly from the services-based solution that Arizona has decided to deploy. And frankly, a lot of lessons to learn from Barb. Barb has been a trusted colleague and a good friend for many years. She is one of the most hardworking people I know, and we're really lucky to have her with us today. So Barb, take the floor.
Well, I'm Barbara Yeager. I'm the State 911 Administrator in Arizona, and have been here for a lot of years through a lot of reiterations and generations of 911 development. Sherry, can you go on? One of the things that we've been fighting with over the many years is we have one of the lowest taxes in the nation for collection. We collect only 20 cents a month for wireline, wireless, and VoIP, and it is very hard to support the 86 PSAPs we have in the state with our limited budget. We were looking for a concept that we wanted to come to reality with, and we talked to a lot of different vendors. And under this managed services environment, we looked at trying to get the network, the equipment, the PSAP answering equipment, and the maintenance all wrapped up in a pretty package with a bow, and that the endorsement, and there's not a vendor product endorsement here. We used our vendors that we used in ours with CenturyLink, who's been the service provider for network 911 services in Arizona for as long as I've been around, which is almost 40 years, reiterations of that company. And then we have other areas that supply their own services. So where they talked about all the different areas in the state of Texas, we really have only 3 areas that work independently. All calls can be transferred back and forth, but they do work independently. So we were looking for something that was kind of out of the box, we wanted to ensure that those communities could go forward with Next Generation 911 on a very strapped and limited budget. Sherry, go ahead. Next slide. Our role in the State 911 office is that we have statutes in place as well as an administrative code that identify what components have to be put into place in order to be eligible for funding. As it shows, we have 86 PSAPs, many with PSAPs with CPE equipment nearing end of life. Back in 2010, we looked at an NG911 proof of concept, and basically we looked at the network at that point, utilizing CenturyLink's very vast technological capabilities to do that test. The proof of concept was an actual county where we had a ladder line dividing that county. So in effect, the community had to have 2 sheriff's departments with 2 radio systems in place so that they could handle the calls, and also the ladder line prevented the calls from being transferred back and forth across that ladder line. So there, we did complete that. It was successful. We had intended at that time, we were collecting a larger amount of money. We had intended to go forward with going live with that network, but what happened is that the legislature opted to reduce our tax, and in doing so, we had to shelve it and put it on the back burner for a long time. Our budget constraints have been around for a while. As I said, we supply the network for 911 through the 911 tax, the maintenance on that equipment that's in the PSAP, and a replacement of PSAP equipment for those 86 PSAPs. And we noticed that the need for 911 for the archaic type of technology that was currently out there in the analog environment, we saw that there was a need to be able to be more versatile in our transferring of calls and the integration between the areas of the state. We also saw that a lot of equipment out there is end of life, and we needed to look at a different concept other than just to have a state contract for equipment and a service agreement environment for our PSAPs to have with their communities. So, and I looked at the Pink Princess phone concept, and back when I was growing up, I had a phone that included all of the network components. You had your phone, you had your equipment, and you had your maintenance, and you paid a per seat cost. And that's what we looked at in a managed services environment. Sherry? How did we get this discussion out among the communities in the state? We used our quarterly PSAP manager meetings that we do. We did focus groups, service provider solution review meetings. What happened is that we had a vendor come forward and say, we'll be willing, and we told them what money we had available to be able to complete the task that we had at hand and in this limited environment. So the goals of the initiative was to provide everything in a per seat cost, and that we had a collaborative and open discussion, and what were the PSAP requirements, and go over the preliminary information. We had a vendor step up to the plate and decided that they were interested in supplying all of these for a very limited amount of money for us, and could allow us for a 5-year contract. And that contract is not with the state. That is a contract between the vendor, and it is a service agreement between the vendor and the community going through their own procurement process. Sherry? We wanted the budget to be friendly. One of the issues that we've had to deal with over the years is we have anything from a 2-position PSAP up to 104-position PSAP, and trying to gather enough money without it being viewed as an excess was very difficult. We wanted to make sure that we could establish a budget that we knew exactly how much would be paying for the next 5, 10, 15 years, and handle it, and we were tasked with coming up with a solution that would meet those requirements and handle all of the positions in the state. We wanted a turnkey support of the core services, the EZNet, call handling, project management, and 24/7 support, as well as the software and hardware refresh in the 5-year time frame. So what we looked at was the development of service-level agreements with ubiquitous service, guaranteed support for the I3 features, network performance, and response and resolution times. Next. So when we received a proposal from the vendor that indicated that they could support this idea, we received their proposal. We went to a third-party provider, a third-party consultant to review all of the documents and the data, to look at both the technical review and also the everything that was involved, so to ensure that the communities were protected and to the best of our ability, and to still be able to fund any 911 advancements. And the competition matters when we talk about that. If we had more vendors come forward and say, yes, we'd be willing to do all 3 components, the network, the equipment, and the maintenance for a per-seat cost, and they could collaborate, it would have been great. The vendor that came forward with 2 equipment providers and the interconnectivity to their network, and that combines their network with a next-generation i3 compatible network, and that is what we opted. Nobody else came forward after a variety of conversations, and we did want the communities to have some options as far as equipment capabilities were concerned. Next. When we looked at service level agreements, we wanted all of these components to be included in that service level agreement that was set up. The technical, the latency, jitter, packet loss, and service availability, the operational side of the house, response times, resolution times, software upgrades, and the functionality, feature functionality, and standard compliance. We were interested in having all those reviewed. We did select, and we had already on state contract, a third-party consultant that was very knowledgeable in the industry, and we felt confident that they could provide us. And they worked very closely with the individual, the company that is currently providing this solution. Next. When we set a minimum standards, we did not get into the detail with the communities. One of the things we look at in Arizona is the independency of our communities. They don't like to be told what to do by the state, so they want to be able to set their own procurement and go through their own procurement process. The current 911 agreement administrative process remains in place. We have an administrative code that outlines what the communities have to do to be eligible for funding. And each PSAP was to vet their agreement individually with their own procurement, finance, and legal departments. The vendor that was selected was able to work directly with the procurement offices within the communities to ensure the language that was in that service agreement met their requirements. And each PSAP was to negotiate any additional requirements or desired. We felt that that would give them the autonomy that they were looking for, and the ability to, the state could still intercede on their behalf with the vendor. Next. Today, right now, we have everything in place to go to a next generation solution as far as the I3 call routing is concerned. The network is up and running at this moment and has PSAPs, the PSAPs available that they can go ahead and sign up with CenturyLink, the provider. And I will say that CenturyLink is the primary provider, has been the primary provider, as I mentioned earlier, throughout most of the NG911, NG911 or previous solutions through basic enhanced with Ali and Annie wireless and so on. The 2 options for call handling platform, as I said, indicates that there's 2 equipment providers that are out there and available, and the PSAPs are given the option to select either one. As of today, we have 12 PSAPs that are live on the network, and they have signed service agreements with the vendor. 26 PSAPs are anticipated to be live by the end of the year, with 50 of the 86 completed by the end of 2018. The engagement with the state's other 911 service providers is something we work very closely with. Those communities have currently their own internal EZNet in place, and they are looking to expand on that. Again, one of the biggest questions will be how can we, under the current funding limitations, how can we continue to support them and their equipment when you're talking a replacement of 1 PSAP with 104 positions. The other service provider in the state has 11 PSAPs under their umbrella, and they are in the process of examining an option that they're looking for to mirror or at least provide the same level of services for the 11 PSAPs under their area. They have not selected a solution at this point in time. Next. Next slide. These are the lessons that we learned. Start planning early. Just because you may not have the funding or you may not know whether you have the funding available, you need to start planning ahead of time and put into place a path that you want to follow. How are you going to get from point A to point B? If you have a vendor in mind, how will they integrate with those other solutions? How will it be a seamless transition from your current technology platform to your next generation 911 platform? Know what you don't know. Ask questions. Ask lots and lots and lots of questions. I know that the vendors out there are very willing to talk to you. They're limited today. I know under some privacy agreements that they can't divulge certain things, but they can, if you enter into a non-disclosure agreement, allow them to talk to you about what's there and how that can go forward. We are looking to go to the core services for the GIS routing sometime within the next year. Anticipate your future needs. One of the things that we've been very limited in this state is the fact that we can support the 600-plus positions that we have in place today, but what about growth? How are you going to grow the system? We can't do that under our current funding limitations, and it relies upon the communities having to come up with some solution and some funding, the possibility of additional funding mechanisms to be put in place in order to continue to support what they have. Get the details and take the time to thoroughly review the details. It took us over a year to get through the review process of the proposal that was submitted. It's long, detailed, a lot of negotiations, the vendor wanting to make some changes, the consultant suggesting changes that would better ensure all of the components that were necessary, and communicate with your constituents. Make sure that you talk to those people that were going to be operating the systems. Make sure you understand exactly what they need to be able to support their communities. Next. This is my information. If you have any questions or concerns, as I said, we have 12 up. We anticipate having the remainder, or at least the 26 up by the end of the year, subject to services and resource availability, but that the intent is by the end of 2018 that we will have 50 of the PSAPs in the state up and running.
Thank you, Ms. Yeager. Once again, we'll start the QA portion of our session, and as a quick reminder, to ask a question, you may either use the WebEx chat feature or the raise hand button. So with that, we'll go ahead with our questions.
How has the limited selection of CPE and other services been received?
Well, we already have 2 vendors on state contract. That are the only, actually 3 vendors on state contract. We did an independent solicitation, and we started that many years ago for CPE equipment, and only 2 of them really came to the forefront and could meet all the criteria that was established under the state procurement rules. So that's been acceptable. We haven't had a whole lot of opposition to any of the, or either of the 2 vendors that have been out there and providing services, which they have been providing for many years.
Has there been any interest in a shared consolidated CPE?
Well, basically what this is in Arizona we have no authority at the state level to require any kind of a consolidation effort, and we haven't seen that taking off with any reality. We've got a lot of, with 86 PSAPs in the state, there's 26 in the Phoenix metropolitan area. It is a political environment, and we haven't seen there be a lot of move toward it. We have in the rural areas seen some consolidation of equipment, and all of this whole solution is based on host remote capabilities.
Thank you. Do you envision being able to provide NG with the same fee, or will an increase be needed?
For us to be able to continue to advance the program, it is envisioned that there be additional funds necessary in order to support it. We can't support it today. If PSAPs want to add positions, we don't have the funding capability to support those positions. We used to be able to support logging recorders, but we can't support that today. So it will be necessary in the long run, in the long term, to look at some kind of a funding increase. But then again, that requires support from the communities to introduce legislation.
Thank you. Does CenturyLink provide TCS service? If not, how will Text 911 be implemented?
They do supply the services through their they have subcontractors that supply those services, and they have quoted us prices for text to 911. We're not to that point yet, so we haven't deployed anything through that, through the text to 911 in Arizona. We have a one PSAP that's up with an over-the-top solution. We are looking at other we're being as versatile as possible, looking for all solutions. One of our largest areas has opted to go with an over-the-top solution initially with their 26 PSAPs, and that will be accomplished within the next year. But the integrated solution is something that can be supported by the NG911, and it is there and ready to go as soon as there's a funding mechanism in place.
All right. Navajo Nation just implemented Basic 911 at the Tuba City and are rolling out to other sites. How easy or difficult is it to move NG911 from there? Shall be stopped and concentrated on NG911 instead?
Well, as far as the Navajo Nation is concerned, the only thing that precludes them from being funded through the state is their completion of a service plan. They are funding their whole infrastructure and everything in place today by themselves. And we can't even look at what they're planning on doing until such time as they have an approved service plan.
Okay. Who are the 2 approved state equipment vendors?
They are Airbus and West.
Thank you.
One other thing, if I could say, I could go ahead. There's one other thing I want to add is that one of the things that we had to look at, and we didn't do that in our original discussions with the vendor, was post 5-year deployment and ongoing. So there are provisions in place now for that service agreement to be extended from years 5 to 10 and 10 to 15 if necessary. And that is with a very minimal increase to the per seat cost.
Okay. And What sources were utilized or referenced to develop the bare minimum requirements to be met by the chosen vendor?
The I3 standards had to be met by the vendor. That was probably the biggest components. The I3, there are other things that we look at in any deployment of a solution, response times, reliability, redundancy, all of those were put into place before before we went out. The vendor out there that was willing to work with us had indicated that they would do an I3 solution, and that has been in place. Again, we've been up and running on 12 of the sites since they're being rolled out quickly. The first site was turned up in March. The biggest comment that we have from the communities that have gone to the NG911 network is the quietness of the network and the quick transfer times of that network. So they're surprised at how quiet the network is and how efficient that network is.
Thank you. To what extent are the two vendors working together to ensure interoperability between adjoining systems?
Right now, the adjoining systems are basically, we have one contractor, and they have both West and Airbus are subcontractors to them. So we work directly with, or the communities work directly with CenturyLink, and CenturyLink negotiates and works with the two subcontractors.
All right. Well, I believe that covers all of our questions, correct? So I want to thank once again both of our speakers, Mr. Early and Ms. Yeager, and ask Lori, do you have any closing remarks that you would like to make?
I'd just like to thank Todd and Barbara both. What both of you have done is really unique in very different ways, and I really appreciate you being willing to share your experience and your expertise. You've provided a really great information. Thank you so much.
Well, this concludes today's webinar. We appreciate everyone's participation. An archived version of today's webinar will be available on 911.gov soon. The next webinar is scheduled for Tuesday, October 10th at noon Eastern Time. A complete listing of the remaining two webinar dates is provided along with the link to register. We hope you will be able to join us. Thank you and have a great day.